Hi everyone. In this second video for our white paper unit, I'm going to address the topic of evaluative language and why we have to be careful about when we use it in the paper. This is one of the most common questions I get asked about whenever I teach this class. So even though we discuss it in the PowerPoint, I'm going to take some moments to further clarify it just to make sure you really get the message. So one of the big things with evaluative language is, so just to clarify, evaluative language is something like X is better than Y. A is worse than B. So good, better, best, things along that line. Basically language that makes comparisons and tries to provide an evaluation as to the quality of something. So now, if you've read all the way through the PowerPoints, you'll see that we want to avoid that in all sections except the recommendation. And the executive summary, obviously, since the executive summary focuses on the recommendation, we'll use evaluative language there. If you haven't gotten that far in the reading yet, please don't worry. But just know, as for the body of the paper as a whole, the only place we're including evaluative language is in the recommendation section, where we finally say, here's my analysis of each outcome. So this ends up causing confusion for people, in part because, in the analysis section, this is where you're putting together the data. This is where you're stacking your solutions up based on your criteria. That could be budget, time, something like whether one's company's reputation is going to be made better or worse. Again, that's all detailed in the criteria and analysis PowerPoint. But so in the analysis section, what you're doing is you're defining and ranking your criteria and taking each solution and seeing how it stacks up against that criteria. So I get a lot of people saying, well, how am I not supposed to use evaluative language in that case? Which is a good question, because obviously when we're stacking things up, that sort of implicitly starts to become clear, especially if you're doing it well, the reader's going to start to see things before you even tell it to them in the recommendation section. So it can be really tempting to use evaluative language because that's getting really clear to you as you're actually performing the analysis. We still don't want to do it. We don't want to say X is better than Y or A is the best choice until that recommendation section. We want to keep the analysis section totally free of it. So what do? Say you are looking at a way to address the issue of plastic pollution in the oceans. And the things you're looking at are a public awareness campaign. You're looking at volunteer cleanup crews, and you're looking at increased fines for offenders when they're caught. Those are the three things you're looking at. And then your criteria are this solution needs to cost no more than $1 million. This solution needs to have a 70% approval rate on an opinion poll, and this solution needs only a small number of people to get it up and running. You need to be operating under a small crew, maybe a team no more than 10 people, because your organization just only has so many resources. So, and then you break down your solutions and you say, okay, public information campaign. This is going to cost $1 million, and then and it's got a 95% approval rating, but it's going to require probably a team of 12 people. Second solution, the cleanup crews. That's going to cost $10 million. Again, these are all things I'm just brainstorming off the top of my head. $10 million. And it's going to require a really big crew, like 20 people, but it also has a really high public approval rating, 90%. And then increased fines for offenders. Say that's going to cost $5 million. It would probably cost more, but for the purposes of discussion, $5 million, and is going, but it has only a 50% approval rating, but it would only require also a team of 5 people. On balance, it's the cheapest one, But does that make it the best one? Not necessarily. And I did make a mistake that I have been telling you not to do in this video. I talked about my some of my criteria out of order. So in the second one, I actually went with budget, team, and then public opinion, where it should have been budget, public opinion, team. So I did make that mistake, but going back, the cheapest one is not always the best one. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. So it really depends on how much we're prioritizing everything. If budget is hands down absolutely the most important choice, well, option 2 still might be the better one, because while it's not as cheap as the third option, it still has a pretty high public approval rating, whereas the third one does not. The third option only met it met 2 of the criteria, but if public approval is really important to you, just because it's cheap and just because it can, have a small team on it, doesn't mean it's a good choice. Because if most of the population is not okay with your decision, you are going to have a hard time getting it done. You just are. If there's massive resistance, it's not going to work so well. So this is why it's very important to, clearly define your criteria and rank your criteria. Anyway, so instead of saying, solution 1 has the highest budget or solution 1 has the worst budget, we would just give straightforward facts. Solution 1 has a budget of $100 million. Solution 2 has a budget of $10 million. Solution 3 has a budget of $5 million. That doesn't say one way or the other, which is good, better, or best. It's just saying, here are the numbers in order. Now in the recommendation section, you can say option 1 has the highest budget, option 2 has the middle budget, option 3 has the lowest budget. And again, not necessarily the best budget. The cheapest thing is not always the best thing. Again, sometimes it is, sometimes it's worth the investment to spend a little more. This is true of a lot of things in life. Anyway, so again, with that budget, rather than in the analysis section using evaluative language, just give how much something costs. Same with the approval poll. If the first 2 solutions both had a 90% approval rating, don't say, oh, each one of these is markedly better than option 3. Just say option 1 had a 90% approval rating. Option 2 had a 90% approval rating. Option 3 had a 50% approval rating. And don't say words like only. Not only a 50% approval rating, just it had a 50% approval rating. Just straightforward. Just the facts. You can try to make this section boring. Honestly, that's what I would encourage. Make it straightforward, boring, just the facts. And then you would, again, do the same thing for option 3, or solution 3, or criteria 3. So solution 3 requires a team of 12 people. Solution 2 requires a team of X number of people. Solution 3 requires a team of 5 people. Again, not saying one is higher or lower than the others, not saying one is better or worse than the others, just putting the data out there and letting the reader see the data. And then you'll put that into a summary table in your recommendation section so the reader can see the data one more time in a nice table format. If you have questions about that, please do send me an email. And then based on that, summary table and the work you've done in the analysis section, then you can say in the recommendation section, based on our criteria and which criteria we value most, we're going to go with option 2, the cleanup crew, because option 3 is maybe it's cheaper, but it has a really low public approval rating. We don't need a low public approval rating right now. We want something that people are going to be on board with. So you would then use evaluative language there. So I hope that clarified it. Again, please email me with any questions. I'm glad to help. So me and my teaching assistant say thanks for watching, and we'll have one more video in this series.